public-private partnership. So the Act was promulgated in 2017, as you mentioned. And so as per the Act, the definition really speaks to a contractual agreement between the public and private sectors.
Now, we touched on this a little earlier on. We're talking about the public-private partnership. It's the Act of 2017. It outlines a process of public entities trying to deliver the PPP projects. But additionally, the discretion is given to public entities in Clause 4 of the Act. Also considering unsolicited proposals as well. Since the inception of the PPP Act, and the public entities have been presented with a number of USPs trying to consider for the PPP implementation. However, in the absence of the legally binding framework, and the public entities and the government in general, they are unable to process and implement some of these projects, which is why it was very vital for us this morning to chat to Naville Geiriseb. He is the acting chief economist for the project appraisal in the Directorate of Public-Private Partnership at the Ministry of Finance, and we want to chit-chat about the unsolicited proposal guidelines for the PPP'S in Namibia. Quite a mouthful. Neville, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Good
and
morning.
After that mouthful, I'm sure your mandate is quite heavy.
I think you've done the job for me this morning.
I think we can just leave now. It's great. It's great.
Thank you so much for having me this morning.
I'm more than looking forward to this interview. So I want to kick the ground running with just some of these terminologies. What is an unsolicited proposal?
Right. So before we get to the unsolicited proposal, just really having an understanding of what is a PPP. So public-private partnership. So the Act was promulgated in 2017, as you mentioned. And so as per the Act, the definition really speaks to a contractual agreement between the public and private sectors for the provision of an infrastructure or service to be used by the public, and where there is a payment linked to performance for the provision of that service, and where there are performance standards set for the private sector to meet while they provide that service. So there is a set definition of what a public-private partnership is, and this can be in different sectors of infrastructure. It can be in water, it can be in energy, it can be transport. So providing that service and having performance standards set, and that performance being linked to the payment. So there's a set definition. So now coming back to unsolicited proposals. So the way that the Act is currently set, only public entities can sort of initiate and originate projects, by which they then approach us, the Public-Private Partnerships Unit at the Ministry of Finance, and then we assist them throughout the implementation process of those projects. So from feasibility study to the first approval, which is called Transaction Approval 1, and then to procurement, and then through the final signing of that agreement. And there's a PPP committee at the unit, which then has the mandate to provide those approvals. So unsolicited proposals means a proposal that is initiated by the private sector. So the private sector identifies a public need, and then based on that identification, they do preliminary work, and then they approach that specific public entity in that specific sector in order to carry out or implement that specific project.
You know what? I appreciate the part where you're seeing people through, because it can be quite a daunting journey. So to know that if I'm coming on board, you're coming on board saying, yeah, we're taking you from A, B, C. We're not just saying, here's A, B, C to C to Z. You know, you're going to see people through. What are some of the pros and cons of these unsolicited proposals?
So in terms of unsolicited proposals, a benefit can be that, you know, the private sector can identify a service or need that perhaps a public entity in that specific sector, for example, if we talk about transport, perhaps there is, you know, for instance, if Windhoek needs a tram service from Karitura to the center of town, a commuter rail, for example, and the entity responsible, the public entity, has not identified that need in their strategic plan, then the private sector could come up with, for example, a project that meets that particular need. So that is a benefit where the private sector has that innovative space and has that sort of motivation or encouragement to invest in the provision of public services. However, a downfall can be that it can limit competition. and it can also limit sort of transparency. So we need to be a bit careful in terms of how we structure that process. And that is the very same reason why we've developed these guidelines.
I see. And speaking about those guidelines and outlines, because you also spoke about a committee that exists, can you elaborate on the process outlined in the existing draft at the moment?
Thank you. So the draft is available on the ministry's website.
Okay.
If you go to Ministry of Finance, PPP unit, under the public notice, you'll find the draft there. And just a snapshot, a sort of bird eye view, is that it outlines the processes in terms of what are the minimum requirements for the submission, what are the criteria for an unsolicited proposal, or for a proposal to be considered as an unsolicited proposal, for a project, to be considered as an unsolicited proposal. And then it outlines the different steps that need to be taken, where the proposal is submitted to the public entity and the unit, and then the different screenings, the initial review of the proposal, whether it meets the criteria and the submission requirements, and then it needs to be approved by the PPP committee in terms of continuing to the detailed evaluation process. And then once it passes that detailed evaluation, then it goes to feasibility study stage and so forth. So these stages are elaborated more in the draft document.
If you've just joined us, we're speaking to Naville, and we are looking at unsolicited proposal guidelines for the PPPs. And if you're wondering what is the PPPs, it's the public-private partnership and how that works. We're just going to touch on Omar Lay with attention, because we're paying very close attention on how we can actually benefit, and we will be touching a bit on some of the guidelines that we need to know in just a hot second. A little attention, Omar Lay with Justin Bieber. Still talking to Naville, acting chief economist for project appraisal in the Directorate of the public-private partnership. And where we left off, we were looking at the outlines in the draft, and he did refer us to the website. And right now, I want to touch on the projects that you were mentioning off air that are already existing right now.
Okay, thank you. So not necessarily existing, but last year...
In the pipelines.
Yes, yeah. I just mentioned that last year we had a PPP conference on the 16th and 17th of June, whereby the Minister of Finance launched a project pipeline where we've identified projects, potential PPP projects, which are in different implementation stages, from feasibility studies to conception. And so just to have a more clearer understanding of what types of projects can be identified as PPP projects.
Yes.
I think the public can go out and look at www.namibiapppconference.com.
If you can just say that again for us.
www.pppconference.com. And you will then go to downloads, where you will find a project booklet, and you'll be able to see sort of the different types of projects that can be considered under the PPP framework.
Indeed. Speaking of the framework, what is the importance of public input to the draft, the guidelines that are there for these unsolicited proposals, who are targeted stakeholders, and when is the deadline to be able to finalize this for?
Thank you for those questions. Well, public input is quite important because it's guidelines that will impact how unsolicited proposals are implemented by different public entities, and the initial engagement between the private sector and the public entities themselves. So it is quite important that we get input from both these different sectors, particularly from the private sector, because as you mentioned in your introduction, public entities, ministries, agencies have been inundated with different proposals from the private sector. However, there has not been a framework to guide that interaction and that engagement. So it's quite important that we get input from the private sector particularly, but as well as from public entities on the draft.
Yeah.
So that we can form a consensus.
Indeed. Because a lot of times as a nation and as people, we're always looking to, what is government doing? What is government doing?
Right.
So I want you to highlight the importance of the private sector and how we can play a role in building the nation.
Right. right. So you'd also asked when is the deadline for the submission. So if you go to the link on the ministry's website, you'll see that it's the 17th of May.
Okay.
By which you have to, you could review that document with your team. You can interrogate and provide those comments and inputs.
Yeah.
And really, so why are triple P's important, and why do we believe that they can play a role? We understand, particularly for the last few years, the economy has been impacted negatively, and also with the impact of COVID over the last 2 years, it is widely known that government cannot do this on their own in terms of advancing Namibia's development to attaining Vision 2030, all the goals in the Harambee Prosperity Plan 2, and also our national development goals. So therefore, private sector really should come in on board in terms of providing that innovation, leveraging on private capital that they can provide as well, in order to assist the government in attaining our development goals for Namibia.
Before I let you go, Naville, is there anything else that you would like to add, and you would like the public to know?
I would really encourage the public in terms of finding out what public-private partnerships are, business people, investors. Educate yourself, we have a wide range of resources available on our website and our downloads. We have the Act available. We have the regulations available that you mentioned. So educate yourself what public-private partnerships are. See how you can, leverage on your experience in sector, and how you can contribute to nation building.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. Highly appreciated.
Thank you very much.
I was just chatting to Naville Geiriseb. He is the acting chief economist for project appraisals in the Directorate of Public-Private Partnership at the Ministry of Finance, and we were talking about unsolicited proposal guidelines. Please do check out the website. It's www.pppprojects.com. That's www.pppprojects.com.